Hello, welcome to the lecture 2 of the course Housing Policy and Planning. In the lecture 1 we have discussed the basic terminologies, the definition, the need of the people and its relation with housing. Now in this lecture basically we will discuss the housing classifications. Why we need to know the classification? Because ultimately we are going to develop policies and learn how to plan for various cities in the housing areas. Therefore, it is very important to know the various typology of the houses and the difference between the typology, so that whenever we make the policy and the planning we can do that accordingly. So, these classifications are done based on various parameters. As we discussed in the lecture 1, that housing can be seen from the various perspective, like multiple unit, like the community building, like the economic group, like the basic services, like the physical element, like the individuality. Similarly, the housing can be classified from various perspective, such as it can be classified based on the land ownership. Secondly, it can be classified based on like structural quality. It can be also classified based on the economic group. Then the land tenure, or it can be also classified based on the built quality, and finally we also classify it based on the origin or supply source. Now let us take one by one how we classify it. Like, not all the houses are owned by every people. So, based on the land ownership, there are basically two different types of house we have. One is like group housing, where basically the people own the house unit or the apartment, but they do not own the land and the infrastructure. It is owned by the community or the residents association. And also there are plotted housing, where the plot or the land and the building both are owned by the house owner. So, difference between group housing and plotted housing is the land and the common infrastructure is owned by the community, but in plotted housing people also own the land. When we differentiate the based on the structural quality, there can be three different type of house conditions. One is, which is we call it as Pakka houses. Basically Pakka houses are foundation, walls and the roof both are made of permanent material, those are called Pakka houses. Then there are semi Pakka houses or Kacha houses. So, Kacha houses is that the wall and the roof both are made of temporary material, and it is sometimes vulnerable to the disasters and the urban risk. On the other hand, semi Pakka materials, semi Pakka houses are those where only one member, maybe the wall or the roof are made of temporary material. So, these based on the structural quality, sometimes houses are classified. Next we come to the economic group. Based on the various different types of economic group, there are housing classifications based on their criteria or affordability limit. Like for example, there are economic group called higher income group. In short, it is called HIG. Similarly, it can be middle income group, in short it is MIG, and lower income group, in short it is LIG. And also the people who are living below the lower income group, who does not have the minimum affordability to afford a house, they are called economically weaker section, in short it is EWS. So, these are the broad 4 categories or classification based on the economic group. Sometimes these economic groups are further subdivided into like higher HIG or different categories of HIG. Sometimes it is categorized at MIG 1 or MIG 2 based on various context and various situation. Like India is a very huge country, various states are there, various geographical variations are there. So, people they sometimes subdivide the broad classification into various subcategory LIG 1, 2 based on their subdivision. Now, next category or next approach to classify the house is the quality of the land ownership or the tenureship, and basically this is a approach how we see a ownership from a tenure point of view. So, it is there may be kind of a freehold property, leasehold, or it can be rental. In the freehold case, the property is owned by the people for the whole life period, and it can be inherited by their next generation. On the other hand, leasehold properties or the building or the house, these are owned or enjoyed by the people for a certain time limit. For example, maybe 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, sometimes 99 years. A rental is it is basically primarily the concept of the lease, but it is given only for the very limited period of time, maybe 1 month to 12 months, and it is renewable. But apart from the freehold, leasehold and rental houses, there are people or there are house where people do not bother about the land tenure, they just occupy and they encroach on the urban land and live there. So, that is a separate case, we will discuss separately. So, this is the classification based on the land tenure, and based on the built quality or the built environment, there can be different type of development like high rise, predominantly low rise apartments or low rise developments are those which can be seen in the most of the Indian cities in the outskirts or the suburb area, basically 1 or 2 storied plotted houses, and that occupies major large chunk of the area. Those are called low rise. On the other hand, mid rise is G plus 4, which is basically walk up apartment to the up to roughly 10 to 12 storied building, and high rise is even go beyond that, and nowadays in the cities we have 30 storied, 40 storied residential building, houses building. So, each type of typologies, high rise, mid rise and low rise, they make different type of built quality, built environment in a city, and the image formed out of that becomes a predominant image of the city. So, that is another typology or the classification we do. Finally, we will see housing classification based on their origin or the supply. Now, from this perspective, there are 3 broad category. The first is organic house, second is formal, and third is informal. Now we take one by one. Now organic houses are those which are basically developed through the years organically without any planned intervention by the government. Basically it is developed by the owner's interest. They develop their own houses in the cities or in the village. So the first category of the organic house will be the kind of a core city house. You will find in the many older cities, like say world cities, sometimes in the world cities that can be also called as. So those are basically very old settlement which emerged from the inception of that city and which is located in the city core area. Sometimes it is surrounded by a fort or a wall and it is called as a walled cities. So that is the first category of the organically developed houses. Second is, there are houses which carries the local culture and architectural style. Especially you will find in India, based on various states, various geographical variations, there are numerous number of houses which carry the local flavor, local culture, local style, local art forms. Those are seen in the traditional houses. I will show all the pictures of all types of houses for your better understanding, but before that let us list all the types of houses. Third category, what we see after the traditional houses is that there are houses other than the core city and traditional houses which is built by the people basically in the outskirts or in the suburb area, basically plotted house, but private plotted house. Plotted house. So these are the typically the options which we have as in the organic category: the core house, core city house, the traditional houses and privately built plotted house. Next we come to the formal houses. The first category will be the private plotted house, but the difference between this privately plotted house and this is basically done in a planned way, in a formal way, in a planned manner, where the plot is given by the government along in the basic infrastructure. The difference between this private plotted house and this private plotted house is that this private plotted house come organically only with the house. Sometimes they lack the basic infrastructure, but in this case this is, since this is a formal supply of the house by the government, these houses come with a proper land, plot and the basic infrastructure, and people come and make their houses. Second is private developer houses. I think you know that the private developer, they can develop large housing complexes in a plot. The plot they can purchase from the government or they can purchase from the people, and they can develop this. So this is another formal house done by the private developer. Then there are public or government developed other houses other than plotted house, like say group housing, basically group housing. All the state government authorities like the housing board and the housing development authorities, all the town and country planning development authorities and also municipal corporations, they sometimes provide this kind of houses. Apart from this, there are houses developed by joint venture company. Joint venture companies are basically public and private. So here the land is given by the public and the building is developed, building and infrastructure is developed by the private developer. And also we have In this case there is no developer in the picture, only the like minded people, they make a cooperative, they get the land from the public agency or the government and they construct their own house, that is called cooperative housing. Later on we will come to details for all the type of housing, but now we are just listing. So, cooperative housing, and also we have employees housing. Employees housing, basically the large organization, it may be government, it may be private, sometimes they construct many houses for their own staff, that is called employees housing, or sometimes it is called as institutional housing. So, these are all options which are termed as the formal housing, comes from the private or the public developer. Now we come to the informal category. In informal category, basically in this category, formal and also organic category, they have the land right. The land is land right, and they come through a formal transaction and it is registered in the government department. So, it has a formal transaction, formal changeover, formal ownership. Whereas, in the cities we find that there are various numbers of the settlement or the houses which are informal, sometimes unauthorized, illegal, which are there in the occupied land, such as the slums or squatters or pavement dwellers. The slums are called sometimes as basti, sometimes as chawls, sometimes as juggi jhopri, sometimes as refugee colonies. Squatters are those settlements which comes and encroach on the public land, especially in the very risk prone areas, like say along the railway lines, along the canals, along the very risk prone areas. And pavement dwellers are those who are basically mobile, who have a nomadic life, who stays in the pavement or a common areas like say bus terminal, station and all those areas. Apart from the slums, squatters and pavement dwellers, there are unauthorized construction also. So, in unauthorized construction, sometimes we see that maybe the people have the land right, they own the land, but they go beyond the this approved or the approved FAR or approved buildability of the plot. For example, maybe they are allowed for FAR up to 1, but they are going beyond that and they are achieving FAR 2 or 3. So, basically those are unauthorized construction, it is found in almost all the cities. So, therefore, the slums, squatters, pavement dwellers and unauthorized construction, these are basically informal houses. The difference between the informal house and formal houses are, the formal houses are built on a formal land which is owned by the people or the community or the individual people. Informal cases, except the unauthorized construction, these are built on the encroached land or the public land or the and another difference is formal houses comes through a formal process, sometimes through the registration in the government department, registration in the private department. Now, and the difference between organic and informal is the organic settlements, organic houses are basically not informal, this is formal, but they grow over the time slowly, unlike the formal thing. Formal houses is provided 1 time, 2 times, 3 times as a whole, as a mass housing, but organic housing they grow over the period of time of 100 years, 50 years spontaneously, but the formal house, it is given by the government or the private developer at one go. So, that is the difference. Now, we will try to see the now based on the economic group like HIG, MIG or LIG, the formal houses which we basically provide on behalf of government, basically it caters all the group, all groups. whereas the informal houses caters basically LIG and EWS, whereas in the organic houses they cater mostly all groups. The formal houses cater all groups except EWS, because the formal house the EWS cannot afford a formal house. Now, if we take the other classification of the housing condition, like say freehold, leasehold, or the rental house, we will see that these houses, the organic houses, can be mostly are freehold, whereas formal houses there are more cases of lease condition or rental houses are there, or it can be freehold also. Whereas the informal houses, those does not bother about the land tenure, and it is mostly built on illegal land or illegal construction. And you can observe that organic house and formal house and informal house both expect or both require different type of intervention. So, if we want to put the intervention, so these are basically existing settlements or house, and these are new houses which is provided by the government or the private agencies, and this is also existing slums and squatter. Mostly it takes 1/3 of the city population. Now, so since these two are mostly existing or ongoing process, basically what we need to regularize or control. But the formal house we need to provide, that is supply. So, supply is the main keywords here. On the other hand, for the informal house, here also we need to control, regularize, and also provide sometimes. So, how to make this kind of house, informal house, and we bring it to the formal mechanism, that is the challenge in the housing policy and planning. So, having said that, now we will see some of the pictures as an example that how it look like and how to differentiate different kinds of house. So, we will see the core city world house, or in the world cities area, traditional houses, private plotted house. In the formal category, private plotted house, private developer house, public government development house, joint venture, cooperative employees, and in the informal house. Now, let us see the examples of all those categories or the classes of the house. This we have discussed early. So, based on the land ownership, so this is a typical example of a plotted house, which basically a single person in most of the cases owns the land and building both. In this case, the owner owns the land and building both, and only the common facilities like the community center or all those things are owned by the community. Whereas in group housing, you can see a typical group housing picture. Here only the apartments, the floor area, that is owned by the people or the individual owner, whereas all the land and the infrastructure, landscaping area, common facility, everything is owned by the, even the common space inside the building, in the lift lobby, staircase lobby, these are all owned by the community as a whole. Now, based on the origin, we discussed all the types of houses. This is one of the picture of the old core city housing taken from one of the India's oldest city, Jodhpur. So, you can see this kind of typical old organic character is seen in the old city or the core city house. Another option which I did not tell there, that another option which is not especially seen in the core urban areas, but when a city grows beyond the city limit and the villages like this comes within the city limit and it is surrounded by the city, it becomes a urban area, though it was initially what was a village or the rural area, but finally it becomes a urban area. This is called urban village. These are the typical pictures how a urban village is look like. Now you will find in Delhi NCR region or in any major cities and its surrounding area, there are many numbers of urban village. It has a different kind of characteristics and which needs different policy and program. These are typical traditional house. In traditional house you will find typical architectural styles, the art form, the construction techniques and the art form. So these are and it varies between the geographical location and the state to state and the language to language. This is a typical private plotted house. The plot is owned by people. They have made their own house. There are several other example can be given. I have just shown only one example so that you understand in a better way. Now in the formal housing category, let us take, this is a formal houses done by the private developer. A typical private developer's house can be seen like this. It is more compact, high storied, and so that more people can come there, and these are private developers house. Whereas the public developers house, like say any development authority or housing boards or the housing development authority like Mahada, they construct this type of house and they provide for the all categories of people. Now I told about the joint ventures house, where basically it is a joint venture between the government and the private agency. This is the first joint venture house which came in the country in West Bengal, named Udayan. You can see the land was given by the public agency, that is government, and the building and the all infrastructures were developed by the private developer, that is called joint ventures housing. This is the cooperative housing, where it is built by the people, a group of people, like minded people. They made a cooperative and made the housing like this. Typically cooperative housing will look different from the private developers housing in terms of their treatment, in terms of their boundary gates and all this thing. It will look personalized treatment, personalized elements you can see in the buildings design on this thing, because here the final decision about the building design and the elevation is taken by the owner, that is the cooperative, not by a private developer. Now this is the employees house. Government of India or government of various state government, they do different kinds of employees house like this for their own employees. So now in the last slot we will see some of the example of the informal house. These are typical example of a slum from the Dharavi area, Mumbai. You can see it is a very huge area surrounded or occupied by the slum hutments. It is very low height, low rise squatters. Basically these are house forms which is coming along the railway lines or along the canals. These are comparatively low duration settlement than the slum, and these are more vulnerable to the disaster and the urban risk. These are typical unauthorized colonies, where the land may be owned by the people, but the construction is illegal or unauthorized, so they need different kind of treatment in the cities. And these are pavement dwellers, where they basically stay on the road, and sometimes they make very temporary kind of shades to live there, and basically they survive on the public amenities like the public tap and the public common public toilets. So this we have all discussed. So these are kind of some of the example of a semi pakka house. The wall is pakka and the roof is basically temporary or the kacha material. This is a fully kacha structure, where you can see the wall and the roof all are made of temporary structure. So these are you can see all types of housing based on the origin or the supply, and sometimes they are seen in the urban setting or the rural setting, or in the common both the settings it is visible, or sometimes it is taken care of by the all categories of income group, or maybe some of like in informal houses it is mainly it caters LIG and EWS. So this is the whole picture what we discussed earlier. Apart from this housing classification, there are few special type of houses which can be classified based on their special requirement, like transit houses which made after the disaster for short period of time, or some resettlement cases. Extreme weather houses, when there is a cyclone, there is a disaster, we take the people from the spot and we give them a house. Old age or senior citizens housing, or working women, working men home or hostels. Service apartment, these are typical special housing cases where essentially may not be that families live there, but short duration living will be there. We will discuss separately in the end part of our course. So, quickly summarize, the housing can be classified based on several parameters, like say the built element, like the land ownership, the quality of the structure, economic group, and the origin. Based on the origin, we broadly categorize in the organic settlement, formal and informal settlement. Both all the kinds of these classification and this thing, they need separate intervention, separate type of treatment, separate type of policy and planning, that we will discuss one by one. In the next lecture, we will basically discuss the housing situation of India, where we will have a overall status description of the all kinds of house, how in India the houses are there, their quantity, qualitative condition, everything. Thank you.